There are certain fundamental truths about this world that are so universal that anyone, no matter their race, color, or creed, can pretty much agree on them. These are the kind of facts that even the most clueless people can't deny. First truth, never trust a post-Vindaloo fart. It's just like trusting a cheap Chinese phone charger. At first it promises fast charging, but 10 minutes later, either your phone overheats and burns your hand, or the charger itself melts from existence. Second truth, spreadable butter is a complete scam, just like free Wi-Fi. It's always advertised everywhere, but the moment you try to connect, either you never get the password, or the internet is so slow that even Google takes 5 minutes to load. And now we can add another undeniable fact to this list. The live-action Snow White's remake was, without a doubt, one of the worst ideas in the entire history of entertainment. Seriously, what part of this disaster did Disney think was going to work? This movie feels less like an adaptation and more like an experimental torture method designed to make people say, "I'd rather go blind than watch this again." A classic fairy tale that stood the test of time for decades got turned into a woke political circus. And the irony? It's called Snow White, but Disney somehow decided that being white is now a problem. Once upon a time, people used to ask, when will Hollywood give us good movies? Now, the only question is, when will Disney start making sense? If you ever want to completely ruin something good, just start thinking like Disney. If there was ever a failure so painfully predictable, so disastrously obvious, and so laughably doomed from the start, it would be this train wreck. A movie that was conceived for all the wrong reasons, starring all the wrong people, pushing all the wrong messages, and telling a story that is so spectacularly wrong, even the Grim Reaper himself would be shaking his head. After all the delays, controversies, and endless speculation that have been suffocating this disaster like a cloud of toxic gas, actually sitting down to watch it felt surreal, like finally meeting a celebrity you followed for years, except not the good kind, more like a Harvey Weinstein type celebrity, the kind you're quietly warned never to be alone in a locked room with. But here we are, and now that I have endured nearly 2 hours of this cinematic dumpster fire, I can confidently say that yes, this film not only lived up to my worst expectations, but somehow managed to outdo them in sheer unfiltered garbage. This bloated, overcooked embarrassment of a production drags itself through every possible failure. Cringe acting, bargain bin costumes, horrifyingly bad CGI, and cinematography so nauseating it could be used as a substitute for food poisoning. Every single element that this movie steals from the original animated classic, completely butchered. The timeless themes of self-sacrifice, heroism, and true love, trampled under the muddy boots of modern Hollywood's obsession with empty, soulless messaging. And speaking of the message, it's so shamelessly forced, so obnoxiously redundant, and so fundamentally contradictory that even the movie itself gives up on it halfway through. It's like watching someone try to force-feed a corpse. Pointless, messy, and a complete waste of time. By the end, one thing becomes painfully clear. If you ever want to witness the brutal murder of a beloved fairy tale, just let Disney make a live-action remake. If there was an Olympic sport for panicked rewrites and embarrassing reshoots, this movie would take home the gold. It's so painfully obvious where they had to duct tape over their own disasters, desperately scrambling to fix things after the world collectively pointed and laughed at their nonsense. Entire subplots, characters, and setups are thrown in, forgotten, and discarded like last week's garbage. And the ending, it's so aggressively anticlimactic that it makes World War Z look like a masterclass in storytelling. Alright, let's get this train wreck of a plot summary over with, so we can finally dump this rotting corpse of a film into the cinematic graveyard where it belongs. The setup for Snow White is loosely based on the original, but in the same way that a McDonald's burger is based on real food. Snow White is born to a generic medieval royal family in a kingdom so vaguely defined that they don't even bother naming it. Though, given its absurdly diverse population, they must have the greatest immigration policy in fantasy history, or at least a subway system faster than the speed of light. Anyway, Snow White's mother croaks, and her father, being a certified moron, remarries Gal Gadot, who immediately manipulates him into running off to war, where he conveniently disappears faster than a Hollywood exec after a box office bomb. Oh no. no, I guess she'll just have to take over the kingdom now. What a terrible inconvenience. Fast forward a few years, and the once prosperous kingdom is now a dystopian wasteland where everyone is broke, starving, and hopeless under the rule of a cartoonishly evil tyrant. Imagine modern day Britain, but with better roads and fewer people complaining about the price of avocados. Then comes the big plot inciting moment. Snow White has a run-in with a bandit named Jonathan, who just wants a little food to survive. But instead of, being a functional queen, evil Gal Gadot decides that the best possible solution is to throw Snow White into the woods so that a random huntsman can straight up execute her. Seems a bit extreme, but hey, logic left this movie a long time ago. Of course, because this script was assembled with the same level of care as a dollar store jigsaw puzzle, the huntsman randomly decides to let Snow White go. She then stumbles through the woods like a lost tourist, only to run into the 7 horror abominations. Creatures so hideously malformed that even Cthulhu himself would wake up in a cold sweat if they showed up in his dreams. At this point, you might be wondering, could this possibly get worse? Spoiler alert, yes, it can. Snow White, the walking red flag. Bro, I'm not even joking. The tiny glimpses we got in the trailers, that was just the appetizer. The real horror show begins when you actually have to sit through this thing on a big screen. These aren't just bad character designs, they're straight up the stuff of nightmares. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to find Mr. Blobby standing at the foot of your bed, silent, motionless, staring at you with those dead, soulless eyes that bore straight into your soul. Yeah, that's the exact feeling you get watching this movie. Snow White, the world's worst house guest. So Snow White waltzes into the dwarves' house uninvited, eats their food, uses up their resources, and then, like the entitled protagonist she is, she tells them to clean up their own house. Excuse me, ma'am, but who the hell do you think you are? An Airbnb critic? And the way she moves? It's like she's permanently stuck in a dream sequence, high on some medieval fantasy LSD. Everything is slow motion twirls, whimsical stares into the distance, and OMG, I'm the main character energy. And honestly, if I were trapped in this movie, I'd either drop acid too or launch myself straight into the nearest enchanted pit. Logic? Who needs logic? Then, for absolutely no reason, Snow White randomly decides that her father might still be alive. And instead of, I don't know, sending scouts, gathering intelligence, or even thinking for a second, she figures the best way to find him is to go deep into the forest and track down a gang of criminals. Ma'am, what? At this point, Disney protagonists were never known for their brains, but this is next level dumb. Someone needs to ask Snow White, girl, you live in a medieval kingdom with spies, messengers, and literally an entire army. Why is your first instinct to go on a one-woman expedition like this? Is some fantasy version of Taken? And let's not even talk about the script. It's written so badly that it feels like AI-generated nonsense where the RAM kept crashing mid-sentence. Final thoughts, this movie will give you nightmares. Bro, if you're thinking, how much worse can this get? Spoiler alert, yes, it can get even worse. This movie isn't just a disaster, it's the rotting corpse of Hollywood creativity dragged out onto the big screen in full view of the world. And now Disney is probably just praying that everyone forgets it ever existed, so Snow White of course runs into Jonathan about 5 minutes after leaving the house. Why? Because why not? Plot needs to happen, and we've got a ticking clock here. Jonathan, the walking disaster, decides to play the hero by taking an arrow meant for her, proving that he's only good for one thing, getting hit by sharp objects. Naturally, Snow White drags him to the dwarves' place to get fixed up. Because what else do you do when your plot's as broken as this? Now, remember those Starbucks baristas from the early trailers who everyone thought were the dwarves? Surprise, they're not dwarves, they're just a gang of washed up actors who had to start robbing people because Evil Queen's genius tax policies shut down their industry. The plot just casually throws this in like, oh yeah, by the way, here's your social commentary on failed careers. It's so on the nose, it's practically a punchline. Jonathan, in his infinite wisdom, decides to lure the Queen's soldiers away so Snow White can escape. Guess what happens next? He gets caught immediately. That's right, he's so good at this hero thing that he gets captured the second he tries to be useful. You couldn't write this level of incompetence if you tried. Then, of course, the evil queen decides enough is enough. She turns into an old hag, gives Snow White a poisoned apple, because who doesn't eat fruit from creepy old ladies? And boom, Snow White is dead. Or dead. Let's be real, this movie's dead inside too. But wait, here comes Jonathan again, escaping from prison just in time for the plot to drag itself forward. He gives Snow White the least passionate kiss in cinematic history. It's almost like watching someone kiss a mannequin, but who cares? Snow White comes back to life because apparently that's how we solve problems in this world. And now here's where Snow White shows us her master plan to take down the evil queen. You ready for this? She walks into town, says hi to the soldiers, and convinces them to rebel just because she can remember their names. Yep, you read that right. Her big plan is to pull the name game on the soldiers. That's it. If Christopher Nolan's brain was a puzzle, this would make it implode. The entire movie feels like someone wrote the first draft of a script, threw it into a blender with a bunch of random ideas, and said, hey, this looks like a movie, let's go film it. The whole plot's held together with duct tape and desperation, like a high school play that got too big for its britches. Honestly, if I had to sum up this film, it's like watching a train wreck. But it's the kind of train wreck that keeps happening over and over again. You think it's over, but no, it's just warming up for round 2 of total nonsense. Seriously? This was their grand plan. The evil queen gets mad, smashes her magic mirror into oblivion, and then it shatters into black glass. It's like a 5th grade art project that accidentally broke. Then, out of nowhere, Snow White becomes the queen. No build up, no reason, just bam. Happily ever after. Tag slapped on for dramatic effect. That ending felt like someone wrote the script, then thought, what do we do now? Let's just throw something in and give it an ending. Breaking the mirror, and then turning Snow White into the queen. That's not storytelling, that's the laziest form of creativity. It's like handing a child a magic wand and saying, go ahead, make something magical. Then they make a mess, and we all pretend it's amazing. Snow White as queen is like giving the keys to a kingdom to someone who's completely clueless. It's like handing over the power to a character who didn't even know how to get from point A to point B. It's not magic, it's pure nonsense, and somehow everyone's supposed to act like it makes sense. And just like that, happily ever after. Remember, this movie's whole plan was nothing but a series of writing mistakes, abandoning any logic for the sake of dragging things out. The ending was like someone hit Ctrl+Alt+Delete halfway through the movie, and instead of rebooting, just decided to leave everything up to chance. Nothing made sense. Now let's talk about Rachel Zegler. Look at her outfit, it seriously looks like it cost $100 off Amazon, like it was picked out of some bargain bin. Her haircut? It makes Anton Chigurh look like a cutting-edge pioneer by comparison. Her performance is ridiculously over the top and totally theater kid vibes, like she's auditioning for a high school play. Her American accent, it comes and goes, depending on whether they're in a reshoot or not. I can at least admit she's trying her best with the material, and she can belt out those musical numbers like any trained vocalist would, but Gal Gadot. It's painful to admit this, but the girl can't act. To play a proper Disney villain, you need charisma, presence, and dramatic range, and Gal Gadot doesn't have any of that. Her delivery manages to be both wooden and scenery chewing at the same time, and when she's belting out a musical number, you can pinpoint exactly when they swapped her voice with someone who can actually sing. Jonathan? Oh boy, another bumbling, forgettable, non-threatening male sidekick on the Disney heroes list. There are brief moments where he seems like he might show some attitude and heroism, but those moments get squashed immediately just to reinforce the idea that men are useless. Visually, the film is an inconsistent mess. CGI Cthulhu nightmares aside, the color scheme is all over the place. Sometimes it's bleak and washed out gray castles and towns that look like Zack Snyder directed it. Then there's the excessive CGI woodland scenes with this over-the-top golden yellow piss filter, so in your face that it actually starts to hurt your eyes after a while. And the funny thing is, there's one scene filmed on location in an actual forest, and the contrast between that and the CGI fantasy version is so jarring. I actually thought the action had shifted to a completely different country, and yes, you can absolutely tell this movie has been reshot to pieces. The kiss scene, where Jonathan brings Snow White back to life, was clearly added in later to appease fans of the original. Snow White has been toned down in places to make her less obnoxious, and I'd bet 90% of the bandits' screen time was cut. Most of them don't even get a single line of dialogue, and again, I'm left asking why the hell they're even in this movie. The biggest problem though is the ending. The original film film had the dwarves battle the evil queen to save Snow White, reinforcing the idea of reciprocal kindness and redemption. Here, Snow White has to do everything herself, and as a result, none of the other factions have anything to do. The bandits, the dwarves, even Jonathan, everyone just kind of stands around and watches the whole thing go down. And I couldn't help but wonder, what is the film even trying to tell us here? Snow White's character is supposed to represent equity and shared responsibility, but when it comes to the crunch, she ends up doing everything herself. This completely negates the very point the film had been trying to make for the last 2 hours. It's this fundamental inability to understand what it's trying to say beyond the tired princess who saves herself trope, which has now become the very cliche the movie tries so hard to avoid. That's the real issue that sinks the film. In short, Snow White is a modern day disaster, a film that's been a mess from start to finish. And now that it's finally out and I've reviewed it, I'm really looking forward to tossing it on the ash heap of history. Do yourself a favor, save your time and money and go watch the original instead. Weird. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Now get lost.